Thank you, Marie. I would like to continue where on one of the key topics that Marie mentioned, the importance of poor quality diets driving all forms of malnutrition. And as Marie mentioned and Schengen too, the nutrition transition is really at the core of this. What does this mean? People shift from traditional diets, rich in coarse grains, staple cereals, and pulses, to diets that are high in sugar, fat, and salt. Part of this shift is also an increasing consumption of what are known as ultra-processed foods. And the graph at the bottom of this slide shows for just a few countries in Asia how this increase has happened over just 12 years. In countries like China, Thailand, and India, the sales of these products per individuals has actually doubled over this short period. Why do we care about ultra-processed food consumption? Because they're not healthy. These results actually just came out yesterday, where people were in a lab setting for 2 weeks exposed to these foods. And as you can see in the top panel, energy consumption went up tremendously. And as a consequence, their weight increased just over a very short 2-week period. So these results are quite shocking, actually. Now, what shapes these urban diets, these unhealthy urban diets? As Marie mentioned, we want to look in this research program at determinants at the consumer level, at the household level, going a bit further away from the household, issues related to the food environment, and then that ties in with the larger food system. I will walk you through this framework step by step. So let's start with individual and household factors and see how they shape the diets of the urban poor. One key thing different between urban and rural areas is that urban dwellers typically purchase most, if not all, of their foods. And the picture on the right side is a boy, an 8-year-old boy in Cape Coast in Ghana, who I met last week on a trip. He gets money every morning to purchase breakfast, his morning snack, and his lunch from food vendors. And only dinner is consumed together with the family. And this is quite typical for a lot of the students we talked to last week. So livelihoods often depend, the problem is that livelihoods often depend on unstable employment. It's well established now that the poor in urban areas have lower access to social safety nets as compared to their rural counterparts. And women tend to be engaged in the workforce with limited access to stable and high quality childcare options. Another issue in urban areas are time constraints and limited access to cooking facilities. People often do not have a place to cook. That drives them to the convenience of processed and ultra-processed foods, ready-to-eat snacks, and street foods. And most of these foods are not healthy, so that increases the risk of overconsumption of energy, added sugar, and salt with poor health consequences. What people consume depends on what's available in the food environment. What's typical about food environments in urban areas? Typically, I mean, not everything is negative. Typically, urban dwellers are exposed or have access to a more diverse food supply than individuals in rural areas, but it's not just all positive. They're also exposed to energy-dense and nutrient-poor ultra-processed foods, and the second picture shows you some examples of that. They're also exposed to aggressive marketing of ultra-processed foods. And the picture on the bottom right I took last week in Kumasi in a school, all the classroom numbers were sponsored by this powdered and sweetened milk brand. So it's just one example. And there is obviously, as Marie mentioned, the modernizing food retail sector with accelerated access to supermarkets. The urban food environment is not independent, it's ultimately part of the larger food system. You could see the food environment as the interface between the consumer and that food system. And what we've seen over the last years is that increases in trade and globalization have changed this urban food system tremendously. Again, just a couple of examples from Ghana. The top picture shows you a breakfast porridge. This was in the south of Ghana, but this is made with millet that comes from hundreds of miles away in the north of Ghana. And then the second picture is Indomie, an Indonesian brand produced in Nigeria, which is increasingly popular in Ghana. The last picture you know is an American soft drink brand. I was not aware of the divine properties of it, but you always learn something new when you travel. So to address these challenges of the poor diets of the diets of poor people in urban areas, we definitely need better evidence. And this is really what this new research program seeks to do. We need better evidence on diets, what do people eat, and what are the drivers of healthy and unhealthy food choices. And we also want to look at this food environment. How healthy is this food environment? What options are available? And how does that food environment and this availability affect what people decide to consume or not consume? Ultimately, it's not just an exercise in generating evidence. The idea is to generate evidence that leads to better policies and programs that can improve the diets, the nutrition, and the health of the urban poor. And it's really about this 8-year-old boy, you know, making sure he has access to good, healthy foods and can develop and grow into a productive, healthy adult. Thank you.